Okay. All right, everybody. We are live in public session, and we are going to continue our retreat topics. We are going to kick off our conversation on our committee structure and how the board works as a whole. So just to kick off the conversation, we currently operate as a board in a committee structure where we have each board member is assigned to at least 2 committees, and the committees share information back to the board via the work session. We had discussed in the past the possibility of going to a committee of the whole structure, and in the case of that structure, we would, the whole board would be present for all of the committee agendas. So what I wanted us to do is take some time to talk about sort of the pros and cons of each method. There is an opportunity to do sort of a hybrid of that. We could say, committee X, we want to eliminate and always have all of those discussions in, with the full board. For example, we tossed around the idea of doing strategic planning as a whole in the past. So we have some options, but I would like us to be able to come to some consensus if possible tonight so that we can start to move forward with planning that new structure and making it happen. So what I'd like to do is just sort of go around the room and see what people's thoughts are. And if you could share sort of, your reasonings why you are in favor of one method over another, that would be terrific. And I will start with our Vice President, Lori.
Thanks, Lisa. So for me, when I was thinking committee of the whole, my thought process, even more than just kind of going through backup, understanding, making sure you're up to speed, was really around the dialogue that you miss that kind of helps drive conversation, clarification that you really kind of only have when you're there. And do not get me wrong, the readouts, they're very thorough, definitively. But like a case in point this time, it was great. Dr. Fahan, I'm like slurring my speech now at 8 o'clock, right? Dr. Mahan spoke regarding what was discussed at CNI. She went ahead and also kind of presented a quick high level for the group. And I thought that was great. It also allowed some, board members who don't participate in that committee to have conversation, but they still kind of miss that initial dialogue. That said, thinking about the concerns around time and packed agendas, I'm a little torn. If we go to the committee of the whole, I think we have to have a really strong governance process around that, whereas we're monitoring that time, right? The board is going to police itself in that activity, right? And say, okay, if I'm thinking of my work life, we're at 5 minutes, to the end of that meeting. I just want to take a moment, quick call that out so someone can wrap up their thoughts. They're prepared. If there's critical items that we ensure we come back to it, especially if we need to come back to it ahead of an action meeting and a vote, or, if there are items that can be parking lot, put them in the parking lot, and then we prioritize those to better our communication, right, back to administration so they know what they need to get back to us and the priority of that ask. It's something I was kind of thinking through in doing it. We've kind of lost, and that burden isn't solely upon the administration, right? Like they're the board committees. So some of that falls to us, and even as a committee of the whole, I think there's still a committee chair because they can help manage that process and liaise with the appropriate administrator through that. So I wanted to come into this in advance of thinking, if we're doing that, here's how we make that work and be more effective, and then we know how we want to proceed. Because I do like the idea of everyone being able to be part of the conversation, especially since there are so many new board members, including myself. I'm not, I'm not a veteran, although it may seem it now, but I just think that that will help put some guardrails around that process in going to that structure so that everybody's timing is being mindful. And if it doesn't work, we move back to committee structure. But I did like the idea Ms. Friedel mentioned previously of if we're going to say with the committee structure, broadcasting it. So at least while we're not there, we have an idea of the conversation, because I do want to eliminate unnecessary or redundant conversations and being mindful of everybody's time. So those are just kind of my high level thoughts. I want to make sure I didn't miss anything on the governance piece of it. Okay, that was enough.
Thank you, Ms. Neary. And by broadcasting it, I just want to make sure I'm remembering Ms. Friedel's comment from our previous meeting. You mean live streaming, and then the members that are not on the committee could watch at their leisure and sort of get perspective on how the meeting went to prepare for the work session. Right.
And knowing it's incumbent upon them, then they're probably signing up to be committed to watching committees that they're not attending. But that may be easier then too, in thinking about is if there's extensive note taking that Mrs. Sugars is sitting there trying to write novels, right? Coming out of these meetings and those conversations, and is it easier just to watch the dialogue and hear what's being said, and then you can go ahead. I'm trying to be creative and coming up and giving everybody what they need and being mindful of their time. And at the same time, it's a little bit more upfront maybe, but less down the road. I don't know. It's a thought.
Okay, thank you for sharing. I will go to Mr. Goodwin.
Hi. So my thoughts is that I like the idea of having committees, individual committees, and the reason why I like that idea is that, but I also would like to recommend that we move, like for the last year or so, we experimented with having all the committee meetings on one night. In past years, we've had 2 nights for committee meetings, the first Monday and Tuesday of the month. And so there would be certain committees that would meet on the first Monday, certain committees that would meet on the first Tuesday. I would like to propose that we go back to that structure. And by doing that, we're able to spend more time in the committee meetings to get more in depth. And I understand, like, there are a number of members that are new that might want to get more exposure to the various committees. But one of the good things that at least what I found over the years is the idea that you can go from after a year, you get in depth in like CNI and P&L, and then you move from CNI to P&L. You may want to stay there, or you can move to other committees where you can be more in depth with those committees. And as long as the readouts are good and the pertinent information, like if there's a major thing in CNI that needs to be expressed to the whole board, those things are usually identified to bring it to the whole board. I just know, at least in this pandemic's kind of board meeting structure, when we have a committee of the whole, the last committee of the whole, I think we started our exec session at 5 o'clock and we didn't end until 1 o'clock in the morning. And I don't know exactly what could be done differently, because if the idea is for everyone to have a part of the conversation, everyone to be participating in the conversation, when everyone decides to participate in that conversation and ask questions, it's great, but then our meetings go super long. So my proposal is that we break it back up into 2 days, spend the extra time to get through all the committee things, and then really make sure that if any really critical items or things that we believe that should be brought to the whole board, that those would be shared with the whole board. And so so that way you can get in depth in a particular area, and then hopefully with the next year you switch, or if you want to stay, you can get in depth with a different area of the board. But I think that to me, that seems like it's a way to spend the time necessary for administration to have the time to present everything they need to present, and at the same time for our meetings, hopefully we go a little bit faster at the work sessions as well as action meetings.
Thank you, Mr. Goodwin. Mrs. Arroyo?
So I'm just looking at all the different ways that we could possibly do this, but I think my recommendation would be to consider the fact that we're in pandemic mode, and so what's the best structure to work in that way. And I do appreciate what Eric just said in saying like having the 2 days, but that doesn't, no matter what the structure is in the days, I think you still have to limit agenda topics to be very focused and specific, and just have someone that's a sergeant of arms to time everything, so that the conversation is just direct and to the point, and with, dialogue, but very, not so that you give yourself the ability to be there for 7 hours if it's not something that you need to be talking about for 7 hours. It also, if you don't have a comment or a question, to not be pushed to have a comment or a question by being put on the spot to respond. And if you don't have something to say, feel some type of way if you don't have something to say. So if we could just raise our hand, and if we have a comment, or utilize the chat box in Teams, if we have a comment, so that can be acknowledged, then that would be easier, and it'll probably reduce some of the time. I do like the idea right now to having committee of the whole, and trying it that way with monitor time, and raising our hands, and just being have a better facilitated conversation in terms of how to organize the meeting versus just how we've tried it so far, because we've tried it and it doesn't seem to be working for us because they've gone late. So how do let's just adjust that a bit. There's nothing wrong in trying a different way to see if it works for us in this format, in this virtual format.
So, Mr. Roy, I just want to make sure I understand. So if, say there's, in the committee of the whole structure, we would limit the agenda items or make them, more specific, and then you're saying just assign specific timeframes. Like, for example, if we're going to allow 2 hours for conversation and there's 6 items, X amount of time per item. I just want to make sure I'm capturing your idea properly.
Yeah, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Mrs. Matlack.
Thank you. I think we have experienced committee of the whole, and we've experienced working on committees, and I think that what I'd like to see us do is stay with the committees, and I like Eric's suggestion of going back to the 2 days where the committees have a little bit more time. It comes down to a couple of things. Doing all committee of the whole is a time management issue, and I have concern who would be, to Rosie's point, who would be managing that time. If it's one of the board members or the board president, then that person is not able to fully participate because they are too busy time managing everything that's going on, and then we lose out on that board member's voice. If it's an administrator, they have the responsibility of providing information to us, and that's also not fair, I think, to put on them in that respect. So I I have a concern about, how we would regiment the time in that respect. I don't think that I think that it doesn't have to be one or the other. We have over the years utilized both methods, where the committee structure is our primary structure, and then as needed we use committee of the whole. And Lisa, you mentioned something about possibly doing a committee like strategic planning as a committee of the whole. I think that since that seems to have been coming up over the past couple of years, that people want to have more of a whole group discussion around those items, I think perhaps we should consider that. But if we do, I would like to take that we consider that as a committee meeting separate from the work session, so that we are treating it as the committee work, and we are taking it out of doing a portion of the work session as a committee of the whole. So just to clear up the waters, if you will, into what we are doing and how we're going to get our work accomplished in a timely manner. So what I was thinking of is, if we went to 2 days for committees, if we could pick one of those days that would be strategic planning, and we would all be present for that committee meeting, as it were. My other, when Lori suggested, about broadcasting the meetings and that other board members could watch that, it made me think of two things. First, it made me think, well, that would be a good way for everybody to get a summary of all the other board meetings and maybe save us some time at the work session. And then I thought, if somebody doesn't watch those meetings, then they're going to be asking a lot of questions and feel left out of the discussion at the work session. So realistically, we can't eliminate any portion. We're just then asking board members to invest a lot more time. And not that, many of us have full-time jobs, we all have families, and we are all volunteering to do this work. I think everybody's intention would be good to watch those meetings, and some of us may watch one other meeting consistently that we're not on because we have a special interest in that. I mean, just an interest like, that happens to be something I know a little more about than other board members or something. But so that I'm not sure that would save us time, and I'm concerned that it might put a little more pressure on the rest of the board members. And then we're kind of doubling the work at the work session by repeating that information. I also think we need to, there is so much to learn, in a district like ours as a board member. And for me, hearing what the summary of the committee and hearing the other committee members chime in and know that they all had a great discussion about something and are moving it forward to the rest of the board, I have a level of trust in my fellow board members that they're bringing something forward, having done their due diligence at the committee meeting. And I'll do my due diligence as a board member, not on that committee, and ask any clarifying questions that I don't have. But I have a level of trust that the board members have done the work that they said that they would do on those committees. So, just to sum up, I would like to stay with the committees. Perhaps if everybody is willing, we could try the strategic planning as a committee of the whole on a committee day, and go from there. And there will be topics, I believe, that come up in BNF or P&L or CNI that we really feel need to be a board discussion and not just start in a committee. And at that point, we can say, all right, let's have that, just that one topic as a committee of the whole. So those are my thoughts. I hope that wasn't too rambling, Mrs. Seidel, and I hope you got that. Thank you.
Yeah. Mrs. Tom.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Lisa. I would strongly suggest a committee as a whole. I guess I feel like I don't have a lot of information. So that is for my opinion. And of course, I'll let the others express themselves. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Tom. Mr. Ovadia?
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Seidel. So a couple thoughts, and I really appreciate so many good points have been brought up tonight. So I do like, I do like the idea of strategic planning as a committee of the whole, but mostly because Mrs. Sugars and I have been working on kind of teeing up a calendar year of stuff that's really good, but the reality is we're going to bring in experts that really, I think board members are probably going to want it to interface with. It seems to me that's where the most duplication might be. However, I would like to stay, kind of being the ringleader a little bit of some of the conversation, just because I think we've spent some time really teeing up a really good year. I would suggest to make maybe another slot monthly on a rotation that's also a committee of the whole. It's something that comes to mind is like when we're doing budget, right? Development. It seems like that would be a good, BNF to be committee of the whole. When we're looking at, kind of like when we've baked or whatever, like there are some issues that are coming through. I think of like P&L and like the anti-racism policy, right? These are really meaty things. I don't know that every month needs to be, but maybe thinking about a rotation could be interesting there. But sort of on the broad level pieces, I think timing and timekeeping is important. I think, Rosie brings that up. That's a great point. Carol brings up that it's a load of work, and that's a great point as well. But I feel like, keeping us on task, really identifying kind of the top issues, 1-2 issues every month that each committee's sort of tackling. It just can't be, 6 or 7. There's just not enough time. Now we can widen the time, but I think depth of discussion could be interesting. I'd really like to play with a consent agenda somewhere, where our first meeting of the month is stuff that just cannot wait. If we could get it down in time, I'd love to see kind of that committee of the whole replace part of that first meeting, but I don't know what the parts and pieces are. I really am not versed enough to say, but I'd love for there to be some time savings somewhere. And then the question is, in our current committee structure, how do we use the time between meetings, to hatch out kind of what discussions will look like, what's rising to the top for the coming month or 2 months. I'm certainly open to trying committee of the whole. I think we do need to be somewhat, I don't know about going all in, because it does seem like if everyone gets their comment on every single piece, especially in this remote world that we live in at the moment, these are long meetings, and effectiveness definitely drops off after 11 p.m. The only other thing to think about is a lot of our meeting pieces end up being public comment lately, and to the person who's not as familiar with meetings, it may seem like, wow, why aren't they just all discussing? I'm sure, this person, that person has these ideas. That's really not the form. I wonder if we can get, in every other month, town hall or something where people can feel like, they can invest in their thing, they can hear from who they want to hear from. But I feel like there's a piece of educating the public that's not. I mean, this is something I hear when Carol talks about kind of a standalone strategic planning or whatever, because there's committee work that's honest committee work that's about trying to figure stuff up and build something. And then there are board meetings that are much more about things that have been hatched to a different level. You know, it's not always easy to tell the difference. So just putting out kind of the expectations of it. But again, with all these things, trying to figure out a reduction in time somewhere so that we can kind of push up what's most important, get that covered, and then let the rest follow. Kind of what I'm thinking.
Thank you, Mr. Abadia. Mrs. Schultz.
Yeah, hi, thank you so much. So I think for myself, again, myself personally, I am starting to experience a little bit of pandemic fatigue, Zoom fatigue, coupled that with having to work virtually and now having to mirror that with also watching my, helping my kids. So for me, based on that and understanding how our past couple meetings have gone, I'm going to lean towards staying in the committee structure. Is really where I think personally I'm going to lean towards. I am struggling a little bit with. I do appreciate the if we want to go to a committee of the whole and we want to do a time limit, but I guess I would really be concerned with what if we're having a healthy conversation. What happens to that conversation? Where does it go? Do we end it? Do we table it a whole nother 30 days? I would really worry about that. Then that just means that we've now taken our committee meetings and we've moved them much later in the night. I just personally think I would want to be respectful to my time, to my peers' time, to my administration's time, because I think our committee of the whole meetings, while it sounds great that we're going to limit time, I don't know that we could stick to that, because I think that our committee meetings are meant, that's like the meat and the potatoes of our meeting. And I think that's where we get our work done. I think that it makes more sense to stick to the committee and get really tight around two things. Our agendas need to be tight. And I think the way we communicate back out to other board members in regards to what does that look like, we should probably be tighter around that and the way we do our readouts so that everybody feels like they were at the meeting. I think that's a little bit more effective and efficient because we're such a large district with so much going on, and we're in this what I call I think everybody's kind of calling it this pandemic fatigue. So to me, that's kind of where I lean. I also, though, do think, and I would agree with you, Ben, I think strategic planning, and my thoughts were to pull strategic planning out. Where that sits is a little bit different. I think there's a lot going on with strategic planning, and there's a lot of meaningful conversations. And I think, Ben, you had made the comment that there's a lot of duplicity and work that kind of hits down to strategic planning. So perhaps maybe that time, if we took strategic planning out of the committee meeting on Monday, we could yield that time to other committee meetings like P&L like BNF and CNI that actually need more time to have more meaningful conversations. So I don't know where we could put strategic planning. I'm open to having strategic planning in our board meetings on Tuesday if we could get really tight around like what Rosie was saying. Maybe in our board meetings, we don't need to do a round robin, and maybe everybody doesn't need to comment. Maybe we only comment if we raise our hand, and if we could get, if we could shorten that, we could use some of that time in that in our Tuesday board meeting to discuss strategic planning. But those were just some of the things that I was kind of thinking. So thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Schultz. Ms. Friedel.
Sure. So I will say I'm a little bit torn because there's a part of me that sees a value to committee of the whole, and there's a part of me that sees a value to keeping the committee structure as it is. For me, though, I think if we kept it as it is, as people have already noted, we need to have more tight agendas, not having so many things that we can't really discuss anything in depth because we're trying to go through so many things in an hour. I also think that we need to have a process or tighten the process so that the members who don't sit on the committees are looking at the agendas and sending any questions they might have or data they might have to, Dr. Malash and the chair, or Lynn and the chair, so that the administrative staff who's working on the projects knows what we're looking for as well, so that we're being conscientious to their workload. So in addition to the report out, I think it would be helpful in my perspective to be doing some front-loaded work, if we have it. And if we don't, that's fine also. But like to have that process. So I would be open to strategic planning being a committee of the whole. I do think that there's a lot of things there that really should have the whole board involved in those conversations. I would also say I am open to keeping the committee structure as is with some built-in processes, and see how it goes with those processes, the shorter agendas and so forth, and revisiting if it's still not working in January. Do we then say, let's try the committee of the whole?
Thank you, Mrs. Friedel. So I like many of you, have similar sentiments. I also would like to maintain the committee structure, although I do see the value in committee of the whole, and I have sort of waffled back and forth on how I feel about it. But I will say that I've been most impressed with the readouts from the committee meetings, and I do feel like I have an opportunity to ask questions in the work session. I also, Ms. Friedel, you made a really great point. I do try and take the time to read the agendas, and I will reach out with questions in advance if I see something that I think I'm gonna need some more information on. So I think that's a great idea to everybody to just take a look at the agendas for all the committee meetings in advance. But I do feel strongly that strategic planning should be broken out from the committee meetings. There are definitely a lot of things that we're going to be talking about over the next months and years that do require full board input. They're more strategic, as the name suggests, conversations. And I really like Ms. Schultz's, or I'm sorry, I can't remember who made the idea about having that just be part of the Tuesday meetings. We've been unofficially doing that for a while, since we don't typically have items to vote on in strategic planning. And we could definitely put some more structure around that and have specific items on that agenda instead of just, leaving it as strategic planning, hold for a strategic planning discussion. So for me, that might work. For the other committees, I also would be in support of bringing them back to 2 days a week and allowing for that natural discussion to flow a little better and have a little more time. My only worry I hear everybody loud and clear on making sure that the agendas are tighter. My only worry is there are some things that administration definitely needs to bring to our attention and needs to make us aware of. So, I'd love to hear their feedback on how you can make the agendas tighter and still present what you need us to know in advance of the meetings. I'm worried that we're sort of handcuffing you from giving us info that we then need to vote on, and that's my worry. Or is there a better way to present that information? I don't know, but that's my one worry about getting our agendas too tight.
Right.
So that's just my 2 cents. But I would, before we see if anybody else has any follow-up questions, I would love to hear your thoughts from an administrative perspective.
So, we've talked about it quite a bit. We see a value in the committee structure. I think we have to go back to 2 days. We've done 1 day, came out of necessity last fall. And then after some discussion with the board that was seated at the time about how meetings were being run and what was being done, we ended up doing it on 1 night. 1 night is just not going to work. time. It hasn't been working, right? It's just too tight in terms of what goes through. In some areas, we can definitely tighten up the agenda for sure about, what's listed as new topics, or at least in terms of what is discussed and what agenda items are. The self-regulation piece with the board or with board members, whether it's the chair, and we, and some of you that have been around remember that we've done this in the past. But there are times when we built agendas and we put in, we're going to discuss this for 10 minutes, we're going to discuss this for 12 minutes, we're going to discuss this for 15 minutes. And we can certainly go back to that. There's a benefit to that. We just have to agree. Again, if everybody is going to agree to that, I don't see any problem with doing that. The intriguing piece, and a number of people talked about, strategic planning and those discussions being done as committee of the whole, being done at the board meeting, and we can just take the committee of the whole word out and just say to be done at the work session, to go through. There is a way that we can to do that for sure. I would tell you that if we're going to, then also upfront, we need to say that if we're going to have the experts come in and present, we need to list them at the beginning of the meeting. That's got to be a presentation. We can't say we're going to have you come present when we get to that point, whether we're in person or online, just because of what that looks like to go through. And it seemed, and then at least in the notes that I wrote down, there seemed to be a bend towards doing that, from the members of the board. There's absolutely a piece we can provide as much, and that's where I know that the agendas, when we got into August and September, certainly became heavier, and based on feedback and what we were taking as the feedback. I think the feedback has been a lot more clear or clearly laid out this evening, but we can absolutely tighten up the agendas. I know that Mr. Avadi and Mrs. Sugars have gone through, and looked at strategic planning agendas for the year, and planning out what we're going to look at month by month, which is fantastic. We can do the same thing in P&L. We can do the same thing in C&I. There are pieces that we can talk about that need to be examined and looked at throughout the course of the year. There's no problem with doing that at all. Always with the flexibility that things are going to arise, and come through. So I think it's been fantastic feedback. It does seem that, again, the lean is more towards continuing the committee structure. And I think Mrs. Friedel talked about it. I know that some of us have talked about it in the past, that if we try and adjust what we're doing, remember, it's October, November, December, right? There's only 3 months right now. The time does go in big chunks because of the way that our board cycle works. But then we have the discussion at the organization meeting or after the organization meeting in January and say, all right, what's the structure? What is working? Has there been a benefit to it? What, the board members getting what they need? Is the discussion progressing? There's no reason that discussion can't take place as we move forward with it. My big worry with having committee of the whole every month is that rather than more input and more information, it's going to become incredibly siloed and streamlined in terms of what goes through, just because of the nature of what that meeting looks like and how much can truly be presented in an authentic fashion. So. Yeah, I mean, again, like I said, I know that people weighed in, and I think there's on both sides with committee of the whole as committees, but it does seem a stronger bend, at least right now, for it to maintain or to adjust the committee structure, go back to 2 days, expand the amount of time that's allotted. You realize there's been a lot of discussion about there are pieces of the agenda that can certainly be transitioned. We can talk about doing consent, and consent parts of the agenda. I think that I can put this in a memo, but I think that everybody also needs to have a working understanding of what that means for a consent agenda to go through, and that the board understands that, and we let the public know that this is what is being done with it, just so that it's clear, because that will certainly, that's a change in practice, and there will be questions that'll come out, about why that's being done, but we can absolutely look at that. In terms of the board agendas, we do special action, the first meeting of the month and the action agenda. There's always going to be stuff on special action for sure. There is no doubt about that. There are always going to be HR items. HR is always going to need to be a closed meeting. HR, and again, my recommendation, no matter what we do with committee of the whole in the future, HR always, I believe, needs to be a separate meeting. Because if not, anything that is discussed, everybody has to be raised. Which raises a whole new level of concern and, in terms of what goes through. So I think that always has to be considered as well. So, and again, I'll let the other administrators, if they want to weigh in, but we have spent some time talking about this as we have gone through. I think that kind of captures where we are, Lynn.
I think there are absolutely things that we can do to improve the committee structure so that board members feel like, particularly board members that aren't on that committee, feel like they're having some participation. I think that, one of the things that we could do is one of the things that I've noticed is the real purpose of having the work session is so that board members can come in the second meeting of the month and just approve things because they've always reviewed them, but we never review them. So we could review whatever is on the agenda, and that might give people some more understanding of what's going on. I think that the committee chairs and the liaisons should be doing the reports together, because I think they could complement each other as they're reporting out to other board members about what happened at that board meeting. I would argue, not to do strategic planning exclusively in committee of the whole. I would maintain the committee structure and maybe beef up what's reported at the committee meetings, because I do think that, particularly with that committee, and I know CNI as well, has a lot of people that come in to speak, and you have professionals coming in and that kind of a thing. And I really think that there could be a way to maintain the committee structure, but beef up what's reported out each month when we get to that piece. I think that we can, as Joe suggested, Ben and I have been working on an outline for the year just because we feel like there's so much that needs to be tackled. I think that if board members had an idea of, well, at this meeting, they're going to talk about this, and I'm kind of interested in that, so maybe I could get, they had an idea of what was going to be discussed through the course of the year to the extent that that's possible, that would give them a better idea of what's coming up. And I do like the idea of, maybe there are times when, for instance, when we're in budget development that, we either beef up what we're reporting out, or we do it a little bit of a different way so that other board members have an opportunity to participate. I would suggest that we maintain what we have through January, and then maybe let us try to implement some of these things, and then maybe going forward from January, if they still want to look at a committee of the whole type structure, we could revisit it at that point.
Thank you.
Dr. Malash, can I add something? It's Dr. Mahan.
You can, Dr. Mahan. How are you?
Well, members of the board, good evening. I just wanted to jump in and say that typically at these meetings, I'm the one who says, I think we really need to be respectful and mindful of time. And one of the things that I heard over and over again tonight was that everyone felt that that was a priority and something that we needed to do. So just as your friendly timekeeper who's been listening to the dialogue and thinks that everything has gone well, it is 8:31, and at the beginning of this meeting, we did talk about monitoring ourselves. And I think this is a perfect example of when and how we need to monitor the dialogue. So I, again, was just being your friendly reminder in that, if we're going to do this, it takes all of us and we all have to do our due diligence. I know that there are a lot of wonderful comments, but this is our first meeting in trying to do it, and we've been unsuccessful.
Thank you for pointing that out.
Thank you, Dr. Mahan.
Anytime.
So in light of the fact that we are at our time, so my notes show that the majority of folks tonight were supportive of keeping the committee structure with some sort of pullout, whether we call it strategic planning or whether we leave time in the agenda for hot topics or things that we need to have a deeper discussion about. And in keeping those committee meetings, there are a couple things that have to happen for people to support that, and that's moving back to the 2 nights rather than 1 night, tightening up agendas and policing ourselves from a time perspective as much as we can, and then in addition to that, on the side, exploring the possibility of a consent agenda and educating everybody on what that means, and is that a possibility of something we can move forward with in the future. And then all of that with an eye on follow-up in January after the reorg meeting to see if it's working and what the next steps are. So I want to propose just what I heard, and then everybody let me know if you're okay with that. So for the next couple of months, maintain the committee structure. For now, break out strategic planning and have that as part of the standard Tuesday meetings. However, it sounds like Ben and Lynn have done a lot of work, so I would recommend that Ben still play point and be sort of the chair of that part of the agenda to keep us on task. And then we regroup in January, or the board regroup in January to see how that's working. And then that gives us 3 months to sort of try this out. Anybody? Yes, Rosie.
I unfortunately have coordinated dates based on what was provided to me with my schedule. I'm not sure I can manage 2 days, 2 separate days, depending on the meetings, which is why I was going back to being mindful of time, organizing agendas and things like that before breaking out to 2. That said, I could take a look at what you will be preparing in terms of that and see what I can manage, but I'm giving you a heads up.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Yes, Lori.
Actually, just a quick question. I agree with that, Lisa, and I'm going to try and be fast because Dr. Mahan makes a good point that made me laugh. Doing that, I do like what Mrs. Matlack said, though, in having strategic planning on, even though it's as a whole on its own night, just the nature of that work and being that it's the direction and vision of things. Those are some heavy conversations. And my fear is if we put that on a night with an action agenda, we're going to be cutting short some of that. So something to be mindful of. I am in alignment with what you said as far as moving forward. But I did have a quick question for Dr. Malash on the HR committee, because I know I've brought that up before in stating that perhaps that should really be committee of the whole. But you mentioned something there, Dr. Malash, so I'm not sure. Is that something, and maybe Mr. Green has to tell us, that we can't do that in committee of the whole? Is there a rule or a concern around that? Because then that would make sense why I've asked that before and we haven't been able to do it, but I wasn't aware as to why.
So I would say from my perspective, it always has to be done in exec, right? Because it's personnel items or personnel matters that would go through. Anybody that we would talk about, any position that would be discussed, those people would have to get a Rice letter to let them know that the board is discussing them or their position. When we have the committee meeting, because it's not the full board having the discussion, we do not have to send a Rice letter to let people know we're talking about them, we're talking about their position. But I'll let Paul will talk, can be more articulate, okay. I'm sure about.
Well, I mean, that's an accurate description, and Rice letters can be very unsettling to staff members, unfortunately, even if it's a positive thing. They tend to get unsettled by that. So from a committee standpoint, it's just a more efficient way to handle HR matters, since it does have to be executive anyway.
Okay, thank you. That helps. That would have helped previously because I ask it like a broken record, but now that makes sense as to why we're not doing it that way. So thank you.
So go ahead, somebody.
I'm just going to say that I agree, and I also liked Carol's suggestion of it being its own like committee night and not part of the whole board meeting.
So then my question is, then what determines what makes it onto the full board discussion agenda? Is it everything that was discussed in strategic planning, or does administration and the board determine the items that should be in that full board discussion section?
Yeah, I mean, I would also say it would be the, administration and the board chair. It comes back into that discussion, in this case, Lynn and Mr. Avadia, having those discussions about, because again, we have the calendar, we
Right.
produce the calendar that we can publish and give to the board, and there is going to be carryover to things that will be discussed there that we know need to be either presented or discussed with the
Right.
full board. But I think that can be shared out.
Okay.
Because the agendas for sure can be shared out. The calendar be shared out in advance.
I mean, that sounds reasonable to me. Is everybody else in favor of that? So again, just a little tweak to what I said. Committee structure would stand, including a strategic planning committee, but then based on the work of that strategic planning committee, there would be specific items that we dive into deeper as a whole board on our Tuesday meetings. And then that space is still available for other committees to use should they need to have a full board discussion as well. Does that work for everyone? Ben, yes.
I think just two things that might help is Ms. Sugars and I want to go to the committee for some feedback, but sort of putting in maybe the next Friday memo or the one after, kind of the what we thought was a good plan for the year. The second thing, though, is we're adding time, and what's great about this group, I think, involved tonight is we're all willing to put the time, but we just have to figure out what some of these implications are. I mean, even once I set it on this consent agenda, I know there got to be implications to it. Having 5 nights a month of meetings, that has tolls associated from an administrative perspective, volunteer perspective, content perspective. And I would just push toward like, what can we do between meetings maybe to save some of that? Because there's got to be savings here. We can't just expect, for instance, our administration to just keep doing the evening hours five nights a week now, or a month without some savings somewhere.
Yeah, I agree. Although we are limited to what we can do in between meetings.
What 5 nights are you referring to?
So Eric, I'm thinking about 2 full board meetings, 2 nights of committee meetings, and a set aside night for like full board outside of the 2 full board meetings. That's what I'm thinking.
Oh, no, I thought what Carol had mentioned is like having our committee meetings on the first Monday and Tuesday, and then one of those meetings would be a committee of the whole.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
That's
the way I understood it.
Right.
Yeah, not a whole separate night.
Okay.
Yeah, I wouldn't. Yeah, I think if we keep it to the 4 nights. Right now we were trying to go with just 3 nights, and that seemed like that just makes the meeting go so long. We missed so much and rushed through stuff. But hopefully if we expanded to 4 nights, we can cover everything, and we can hopefully shorten, especially the work session meeting.
Okay, I'm with you now.
Okay, so I think I muddied the waters there, and I apologize. So the board wishes to continue with the committee structure. Strategic planning has its own committee, but that is a committee of the whole, or do you still want to have the committee structure for strategic planning and then we discuss it in our Tuesday meetings?
I'm open. I'm open either way. I don't feel like I believe that we have the right people on the committee that Ben will come back and share to the whole board, and we can have the discussion. I mean, if we want to make a committee a whole, I'm fine. But I feel like the people on that committee can bring that information back to the board, and we can have a good discussion at the work session.
So, and my question would be, Lisa and Dr. Malash and Mr. Green, how is it decided? So if it was to stay a committee meeting and not a committee of the whole for strategic planning, how would it be agreed upon what topics for discussion become committee of the whole?
So if I heard what my thought, and I think Joe is thinking along the same lines, is that, been as the chair of strategic planning or the chair of any other committee that had an item that needed, more input from the full board or needed to be presented to the full board would bring that to administration to add on to the Tuesday agenda.
And I would say, Ms. Friedel, and that can be discussed at the committee meeting. You know what I mean? With the board members who are present to say, listen, I think this needs to go for the full board to have that discussion. I think there is influence, in the small group instruction then to inform the large group to go through. Ultimately, I think that the committee chair, would have that responsibility to own that piece of the conversation, with the administrative liaison.
Okay.
So I'll propose sort of what I think I'm hearing, and then we'll take an informal vote on it. So committee structure, 2 nights per week, including a committee for strategic planning, tighter agendas, 2 nights. The committee chairs in each of those meetings will identify if there's items that need to be brought to the full board for discussion. They'll share those with administration, and that will fall into our open available time that we're allotting in each of our Tuesday meetings. And that's in addition to the work session, right? Like we'll have time allocated for these full board strategic conversations. And we'll do that through January and then reassess. Is everybody in favor of that? Anybody opposed? Okay, all right, so that's our plan for now. So the only thing we have to do is reissue the dates and times of the committee meetings, because we only have a one night schedule set up for right now.
Lisa, will you reach out to the board members to see, like Rosie has already identified she has work conflicts on some evenings. Will you reach out to us so we can let you know if we're flexible to both days or if certain days work better? I mean, obviously you may not be able to accommodate everyone.
Yeah. Yep, I just need the dates and the time slots that administration is proposing, and then I'll reach out to the board to see what works. And we can always, we could in theory switch committees around if we had to accommodate someone's work schedule. We've done that in the past, so that is an option if we have to go that route too. So, but yes, I will reach out to the board members individually once I have those dates and times.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, anything else? And since we're over, I am going to propose that we have a follow-up retreat so we can finish our conversation on our board self-evaluation. So I will talk to Dr. Malash about when there's some proposed dates and times, and I'll shoot that out to the board to see what everybody's agreeable to. And if nobody has anything else, I'd like to make a motion to adjourn. And can I ask Mrs. Neary for a second?
I second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the motion carries. Thank you all for joining us on a Monday evening. I really appreciate it.
All right, take care.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night. Bye.